Parashat Re'eh begins with a bracha and a klala, with a blessing and a curse. Re'eh ani noten lifnechem bracha u'klala. Moshe says to the people, you have a choice. You can either keep the mitzvot and then you'll be blessed, or not keep the mitzvot and go away from God's path and then you'll be cursed. There's two ways that we can understand this idea of the blessing and the curse, both of which I think find expression later on in the book of Sefer Dvarim. One way is to think of the blessing and the curse as God's responses in terms of sachar va'onesh, in terms of reward and punishment. That if you keep the mitzvah, God will reward you, and if you don't, then God will punish you. And we see this expressed very clearly at the end of the book in Parashat Ki Tavo, where the God describes, or Moshe describes to the people the wonderful life that they will have in the land if they keep the mitzvot, and then the very elaborate description of the terrible things that will happen if they don't. But there's another way to think about the bracha and the klala, and not as rewards or punishment, but as something which is inherent and internal to keep a mitzvot or not keep a mitzvot. If you keep the mitzvot, then the life that you will set up in keeping mitzvot will be a bracha, will be a blessing. And if you don't keep the mitzvot, then your life will be a klala, will be a curse. Your life will be, your life in the land will be broken and troubled because you're not keeping the mitzvot. I think this idea also finds expression in Sefer Dvarim in many different places. I want to focus in on one that appears in our parasha. If we look later on towards the end of the parasha, we find the mitzvah of tzedakah. The mitzvah of tzedakah is introduced to us in a very special context. The Torah starts off with the mitzvah of shmitat ksafim, which means that at the end of every 6-7 years, at every 7th year, then all loans are forgiven. As one can imagine, this is an exceptionally difficult mitzvah to perform. It involves a very, very delicate balance on a really high level on the part of both sides of the loan. Both the lender and the borrower need to understand that, well, first of all, the borrower needs to understand that if he accepts this forgiveness of the loan, if he simply takes it for granted, then very quickly all credit will dry up and people won't lend, and it will be and there won't be any money to borrow. At the same time, the lender needs to be able to withstand the difficulty that if push comes to shove, he's going to have to forgive his loans. It's only in a very, very high level, in a sort of exceptional situation, that people will be able to live up to this mitzvah. And historically, we know that people were not successful in living up to this mitzvah. The Torah very clearly understands this, because immediately following this passage, we have another passage, the passage where we learn about tzedakah in the sort of more conventional sense of giving gifts to the needy. What's so striking here is the summary passage of both of them. The passage at the end, or the summary, if you like, of the story of Shmitat Ksafim, in which forgiveness of loans with the attendant requirement of a very high level on both sides and both participants, concludes with the beautiful pasuk of Efes ki lo yeh becha evyon ki yivarechecha Adonai ba'aretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha nachala lirishta. If you keep this mitzvah, then there will not be any poverty. The ideal involved in people being able to relate to each other on this level will indeed achieve a society and a situation in which there aren't any really poor people. Yet, this following passage concludes, the passage of tzedakah, of giving gifts, with what seems to be a contradiction. Ki lo yechdal evyon mikerev haaretz. There's no possibility of poverty being lost in the land. And al ken anochi mitzavcha lemo patoch tiftach et yadcha leachicha laniyecha le'evoncha ba'aretzecha. And therefore I command you to open up your hands to your brothers who are poor and downtrodden in the land. There seems to be a contradiction, as Rashi points out, between, on the one hand, saying there won't be any poor people, and on the other hand saying there's going to be poor people, so therefore you need to open up your hands and your heart. But the explanation, as Rashi also points out, I think is very clear. The two mitzvot operate under different conditions. If we can create a society in which both borrowers and lenders understand the delicate balance that they find themselves, and both strive, the borrowers strive to always return their debts, and the lenders strive to lend even at the risk of it being forgiven, then we can create a just society in which there is no real poverty. If we can't do that, and usually, unfortunately, we cannot do that, then we require charity in the conventional sense of giving gifts to poor people. But giving gifts to poor people and conventional charity always will tend to perpetuate the situation of the poor and the rich rich give to the poor depend upon the rich, which will create the situation, as we see in the Pasuk, Ki lo yechdal evyon mikerav haaretz, that the poverty will never be banished from the land. That is, in a certain kind of a sense, the klala inherent in not keeping the mitzvah of shmitat ksafim, of maintaining a perfectly just society, and then we are cursed with having to deal with poverty in every generation. Shabbat Shalom.